Zahra had learned early in life that she was different. Not because she wanted to be, but because her stepmother, Mama Jemba, had decided it for her. From the moment she was brought into the house as a little girl, she had been treated as an outsider. Mama Jemba made no secret of her preference for Amani, her own daughter, showering her with love, gifts, and praise, while Zahra was left to do the work no one else wanted to do. The mornings always began the same way. Amani waking up in her soft, embroidered sheets while Zahra had already been up for hours, fetching water, preparing breakfast, and sweeping the courtyard before the sun had fully risen. If she was too slow, Mama Jemba's sharp voice would cut through the silence, a reminder that she was not there to be spoiled like Amani. She was there to serve. Zahra had stopped questioning why a long time ago. She had seen how her stepmother's eyes gleamed whenever wealthy merchants visited their village, how she pushed Amani forward like a prized jewel, hoping to catch the attention of a suitor who could offer riches. To Mama Jemba, wealth was everything. Respect, comfort, happiness, all of it, she believed, came only from money. And Zahra, with no dowry, no status, and no favor in her stepmother's eyes, had nothing. At night, when she lay on her thin mat near the kitchen, she would dream of escape, not of riches or a grand palace, but simply of a home where she would be seen, where her worth would not be measured in coins or gifts. But that dream seemed impossible. The only way out for a girl like her was marriage, and Mama Jemba had already made it clear. No wealthy man would ever want a girl like Zahra. Zahra met Musa on a day like any other, when the weight of her chores had driven her beyond the village, toward the quiet fields where the scent of fresh wood filled the air. He was working beneath the shade of a large baobab tree, his strong hands carving a wooden frame with precise, patient movements. Unlike the merchants who passed through the village in their fine robes, Musa was simple. His clothes were worn, his hands calloused, but his smile was warm. When he saw her struggling with a heavy basket, he set his tools aside and helped her without hesitation. She had expected silence, maybe indifference, but instead he spoke to her like she was someone worth knowing. He asked about her day, about her dreams. No one had ever asked Zahra about her dreams before. She found herself returning to that place more often, lingering near the baobab tree, drawn to the peace she found in his presence. When Musa asked for her hand in marriage, Zahra felt something she had never known: choice. He had no wealth, no grand titles, but he had kindness. He had respect. And for the first time in her life, she wanted something for herself. Not for Mama Jemba, not for the village, but for her own happiness. When news of the proposal reached her stepmother, the house shook with rage. Mama Jemba screamed, calling her a disgrace, a fool for throwing away her only chance at a better life. "A poor man? A carpenter? Is this what you think you deserve?" She spat, her voice filled with disgust. Amani laughed, whispering to the other girls in the village, spreading the tale of Zahra's foolishness like wildfire. But Zahra did not waver. She stood tall, defiant, as she accepted Musa's proposal. The wedding was nothing like Amani's would one day be. There were no golden decorations, no feasts overflowing with food. Instead, there was a simple ceremony beneath the very tree where they had met. The villagers gathered, but not to celebrate. They came to sneer, to gossip, to witness the shame of the girl who had thrown away her future for a man with nothing. Mama Jemba did not bless the marriage. Instead, she stood before the crowd and delivered her final words to Zahra, her voice cold and unyielding. "You are no daughter of mine," she declared. "From this day forward, you are nothing to me." Laughter rippled through the crowd as Zahra walked away, her hands in Musa's. They whispered about how she had doomed herself, how she would return one day, begging to be taken back. But Zahra did not look back. She had made her choice. And though the road ahead was uncertain, for the first time, she felt free.
Life with Musa was simple, but it was hers. The small hut they called home was nothing like the grand house she had grown up in. But it was filled with something Zahra had never known: peace. She woke up to the sound of birds instead of Mama Jemba's sharp commands, and though the days were filled with hard work, she never felt like a servant. Here, her efforts were valued. Musa treated her as an equal, always thanking her for every meal, every stitch, every moment she spent making their house a home. But the village had not forgotten her. Mama Jemba made sure of that. The gossip spread like wildfire: how Zahra was struggling, how she had thrown away a life of comfort for a man who could barely feed her. The women at the well whispered behind cupped hands, shaking their heads in mock pity. Poor Zahra, they sighed, their voices dripping with insincerity. She had everything, and now look at her. Zahra ignored them. She had expected this. What she had not expected was the day Mama Jemba and Amani showed up at her doorstep. They arrived in style, carried on donkeys, their clothes shimmering in the afternoon sun. Amani's jewellery jingled as she laughed, her gaze sweeping over the tiny hut with amusement. Mama Jemba stepped inside without permission, wrinkling her nose as she looked around. "So this is where you live now," she said, her voice filled with mockery. "A fine palace for a foolish girl." Amani ran her fingers over the simple wooden furniture, shaking her head. "I don't know how you stand it, sister. No silk, no servants, just this." Zahra clenched her fists, refusing to let them see her anger. But then, Mama Jemba's voice turned sharp. "It's not too late, Zahra. You can leave this life. You can come back home, where you belong. Amani is set to marry a wealthy merchant, and there are still men who would take you if you beg." Zahra met her stepmother's gaze without flinching. "I am home," she said simply. Mama Jemba's face twisted with rage, but before she could speak, Musa stepped in. He was calm, his presence steady as always, but there was something unreadable in his eyes. "My wife does not need saving," he said, his voice firm. "She is exactly where she is meant to be." The visit ended in more insults, more laughter, and finally, Mama Jemba's parting words. "One day, you will regret this, Zahra, and when you do, don't come crawling back." But even as they left, something unsettled Zahra. That night, as she lay beside Musa, she realized he had grown distant. Lately, he had been disappearing after dark, slipping away when he thought she was asleep. Rich-looking men had started visiting him in secret, their voices low, their eyes watchful. Something was not right, and for the first time since marrying him, Zahra wondered, who was the man she had married? Zahra had always known Musa to be a quiet man, but lately his silence felt heavier, filled with things unsaid. She had asked him about his past before, about his family, his childhood, but he always brushed it off with a small smile and vague words. "The past is behind us," he would say. "What matters is the life we build now." At first, she had accepted it. She had chosen him for the man he was, not for where he had come from. But now, she wasn't so sure. The visitors kept coming, always at night, always in hushed voices. Zahra would wake to the sound of footsteps outside, the murmur of deep conversations just beyond the thin walls of their hut. She tried to listen, pressing her ear to the door, but the words were never clear enough to make sense. One night, she gathered her courage and asked, "Who are these men, Musa? Why do they come here?" Musa barely looked up from his work, carving a piece of wood with slow, deliberate movements. "Just business," he said simply. "What kind of business?" she pressed. He sighed, setting the carving tool down. "You worry too much, Zahra. Trust me." But how could she not worry? His absences were growing longer, his gaze more distant. And then there were the small things. a bag of fine cloth hidden beneath their sleeping mat, a gold coin she had found near the water pot. They lived simply, scraping by on what they earned. So where had these luxuries come from? One evening, she followed him. When he slipped out of their hut, Zahra waited a few moments before stepping into the darkness, keeping her distance as she trailed him. He walked with purpose, moving toward the edge of the village, where the land stretched into the unknown. A flickering lantern revealed the figures waiting for him, men dressed too finely for simple traders. They greeted him not as a poor carpenter, but as someone of importance, someone they respected. Zahra's heart pounded. Who was Musa, and what had he been keeping from her all this time? Mama Jemba could not stand it. Every time she passed by Zahra's small hut, she expected to see misery, to hear her stepdaughter crying out in regret. But no, Zahra held her head high, walking through the village with quiet confidence. Worse, she still looked happy. It enraged Mama Jemba, a girl who had defied her, who had chosen a poor man over a life of comfort, had no right to happiness. So she decided to take it from her. The rumors started subtly, whispered at the market, murmured over steaming pots at the well. "Have you noticed?" Mama Jemba would say, leaning in as if sharing a terrible secret. "Musa never speaks of his past. A man like that, what is he hiding?" Others joined in eagerly. "And those men who visit him at night? No honest man has dealings in the dark." Then she added the final blow. "I heard from a traveller that a thief was seen fleeing from the city months ago. Wealthy, well-dressed, running from the law. And now here he is, living among us, pretending to be one of us." The rumours spread like fire. The villagers, already wary of Musa's mysterious ways, latched on to the story. The elders took notice, their once welcoming gazes turning cold. Slowly, Zahra began to feel the weight of their judgment. It started small. Women who once greeted her at the well now turned away. The tailor, who had once sewn her dresses, suddenly had no time. Then came the real punishment. When the village held its celebrations, Zahra was not invited. Weddings, naming ceremonies, feasts, her name was left out, her presence unwelcome. She tried to ignore it, tried to act as if it did not hurt. But the worst part was knowing Mama Jemba was behind it all. Mama Jemba, who now walked with her head even higher. Amani had just married a wealthy merchant, and the wedding had been the grandest the village had seen. The finest silks, gold bracelets heavy on Amani's wrists. Mama Jemba boasted about it to anyone who would listen. "A real marriage," she would say, loud enough for Zahra to hear. Not like some foolish girl who threw herself away on a nobody. Zahra's blood boiled, but she refused to react. She would not give Mama Jemba the satisfaction of seeing her break. One night, she told Musa, "They are trying to turn me against you. They say you are a thief." Musa's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes. He reached for her hands, his touch firm. "Do you believe them?" Zahra met his gaze without hesitation. No. She did not care what the village thought. She did not care about Mama Jemba's schemes. She had made her choice, and she would stand by it, no matter what came next. Musa had always been strong, but when he fell ill, it was as if the life drained from him overnight. His hands, once steady and firm, trembled as he tried to lift a cup of water. His breath came in shallow gasps. His skin burned with fever. And no matter what Zahra did, herbal remedies, cold cloths, whispered prayers, he only grew weaker. The village noticed, and they laughed. "This is what happens when you marry a man with nothing," they sneered. "Love cannot fill an empty stomach. Love cannot buy medicine." Zahra ignored them, working tirelessly to care for her husband. She fetched water, prepared food he was too weak to eat, and sat by his side through the long, restless nights. She refused to give up on him. Then, Mama Jemba came. She arrived with Amani, dressed in her finest silks, gold bangles glinting in the sun. The contrast between them and Zahra, exhausted and dressed in a simple wrap, could not have been more stark. Mama Jemba's smile was as sharp as a blade. My poor Zahra, she sighed. See where your choices have brought you? She gestured around the small hut, her nose wrinkling at its humble state. You are still young, still beautiful. Why waste your life suffering? Zahra stiffened. What do you want? Mama Jemba tilted her head, feigning kindness. I can fix this. I have spoken to a wealthy trader. He is looking for a wife. I can arrange everything. You will never have to struggle again. Zahra clenched her fists. And Musa? Mama Jemba shrugged. He is already half in the grave, a sick man with no money. He will not survive much longer. Zahra's chest burned with fury. She stood, facing her stepmother, her voice steady. I will not leave him. Mama Jemba's smile faltered. Think carefully, Zahra. This is your last chance. When he dies, who will take care of you? Zahra turned to look at Musa, his breathing shallow but steady. Then she looked back at her stepmother, her resolve unshaken. I will take care of myself. Mama Jemba's eyes darkened, her lips pressing into a thin line. Without another word, she turned and walked away. As the sound of their footsteps faded, Zahra sat beside Musa once more, brushing a damp cloth across his forehead. She had chosen him once, and she would choose him again. The afternoon sun blazed over the village, casting long shadows across the dusty paths where children played and elders gossiped under the baobab tree. Zahra was outside their small hut, pounding millet for the evening meal, her hands moving rhythmically despite the weight of exhaustion in her bones. Then, a stranger arrived. He rode on a fine horse, his garments richer than anything the villagers had ever seen. His robes shimmered with intricate embroidery, and golden bangles clinked on his wrists as he dismounted. A hush fell over the village as the man scanned the crowd with sharp eyes, searching for someone. Zahra wiped the sweat from her brow and watched as the stranger's gaze finally landed on Musa, who was sitting weakly outside their home, still recovering from his illness. The man inhaled sharply and strode forward. Then, to the shock of everyone, he fell to his knees. Your Highness, he whispered, it is time. The silence that followed was suffocating. The villagers, who had spent years mocking Musa, gasped in disbelief. Mama Jemba, standing nearby, paled. What did you just say? She stammered. The stranger ignored her, his eyes locked onto Musa, who now looked startled, as if he had been caught in a trap he thought he had escaped. Zahra's heart pounded in her chest. Highness? She turned to Musa, her voice barely above a whisper. Musa. What is he talking about? Musa didn't answer immediately. He simply closed his eyes, as if accepting something inevitable. Then, slowly, he stood up, steadier than he had been in weeks. The villagers pressed closer, murmuring among themselves. Amani clutched her mother's arm, her eyes wide with confusion. Mama Jemba shook her head, refusing to believe it. This must be a mistake, she hissed. Musa is a nobody. He is just a... The messenger lifted his head and spoke with authority. This man is not Musa, the poor carpenter. He is Prince Khalid, heir to the throne. Gasps erupted. Zahra felt the ground shift beneath her. The man she had married, the man the world had shunned, the man she had fought for, was royalty. She looked at Musa, no, Prince Khalid, as he turned to her with an expression she couldn't yet read. Nothing would ever be the same again. The silence after the revelation was deafening. The villagers, who had once mocked Musa for being a nobody, stood frozen, their mouths hanging open. Mama Jemba swayed on her feet, her breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. Zahra's heart pounded as she turned to Musa, no, Prince Khalid. She had spent months defending him, enduring mockery and humiliation, believing he was just an ordinary man with a kind heart. But now, everything had changed. She took a shaky step toward him. Is it true? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Musa, Prince Khalid, sighed, rubbing his forehead as if he had carried this burden for too long. Then, With quiet resignation, he nodded. Yes, Zahra. It's true. The villagers erupted into stunned murmurs. Some stepped back, as if suddenly unworthy to stand near him. Others, the same ones who had insulted him, now looked at him with awe. Mama Jemba's shock finally broke. She clutched her chest and let out a strangled cry. This is impossible! She staggered, and Amani barely caught her before she collapsed into the dust. Zahra, still trying to make sense of it all, shook her head. Why? Why did you hide this from me? Musa, no, Khalid, looked at her, his gaze filled with something between regret and hope. Because I needed to know, he said softly. All my life, people have treated me differently because of my title. I have seen men bow and women chase after me for power, not love. His expression darkened. When my father told me I would soon have to marry, I couldn't bear the thought of choosing a woman who only saw my wealth. He took Zahra's hands, his grip firm but pleading. So I left the palace. I lived as a commoner, worked as one, struggled as one, and that's when I found you. His voice wavered. You loved me when I had nothing. You chose me when everyone else mocked you for it. Tears stung Zahra's eyes. Everything she had suffered, every insult, every moment of shame, it had all been real. But now, so was this moment. The man she had fought for, the man she had stood by, was standing before her, not as a poor carpenter, but as a prince. Mama Jemba let out a wail of despair, clawing at Amani's arm. My foolish daughter married a prince and I didn't even know. All these years, her voice cracked, I have treated him like a beggar. She collapsed onto the ground, her fine robes gathering dust. The villagers, who once stood with her in scorn, now stepped away in quiet amusement. Amani, who had always flaunted her wealth and status over Zahra, stared at Khalid in disbelief. The world had turned upside down, and Zahra was at the center of it. And yet, despite all the shock and noise around her, only one thought filled her mind. Had she truly won, or had she lost the man she thought she knew? As the golden royal carriages rolled into the village, the once mocking villagers gathered in stunned silence. The same people who had scorned Zahra now stood with wide eyes, watching as she prepared to leave with her husband. No, her prince. Zahra sat beside Musa, Prince Khalid, still struggling to process everything. The dusty roads she had walked barefoot, the small hut she had once cleaned every morning, all of it would soon be left behind. She was leaving as a different woman, no longer the poor girl they had pitied, but the future queen. Mama Jemba pushed through the crowd, her once proud face streaked with tears. Gone was her arrogance, her sharp tongue now replaced by desperate pleas. She dropped to her knees before Musa's carriage, clutching the hem of his royal robe. Your Highness, forgive me. I was blind. I didn't know who you were. Her voice cracked. I only wanted the best for Zahra. I was strict because I loved her. Musa looked down at her, his face unreadable. The same woman who had humiliated him in front of the entire village, who had belittled Zahra every chance she got, was now at his feet, begging. The villagers watched in silence, waiting to see what he would do. But Musa's voice was calm, steady. You never respected your daughter. He looked her in the eye, his words carrying a weight that crushed whatever hope she had left. Not when she lived under your roof, and not when she chose her own path. Mama Jemba let out a broken sob. She had spent her life chasing wealth and status, yet in the end, the daughter she had scorned was the one who became royalty. The carriages began to move, and the villagers erupted into cheers. They had once mocked Zahra, but now they celebrated her. People waved brightly coloured fabrics in the air, chanting her name. Drums beat in a wild rhythm, marking the victory of the girl who had been nothing but, was now everything. As the village faded behind them, Zahra looked ahead. She had left as an unwanted stepdaughter, but she was returning to the palace as a queen. And yet, Deep inside, she wondered, would she ever truly feel like one? Amani sat in her grand home, surrounded by riches, yet feeling more trapped than ever. The gold bangles on her wrists felt like shackles, and the luxurious silks that once made her proud now felt suffocating. Her husband, the wealthy merchant she had married, treated her like a possession, not a wife. She had everything Mama Jemba had wanted for her: wealth, status, luxury, but not happiness. She thought of Zahra, the stepsister she had once mocked. Zahra had chosen love over gold, and in the end, she had gained everything. Amani had laughed at her, whispered cruel words behind her back, believing she had made the better choice. But now, Zahra was a queen, and Amani was just a woman trapped in a loveless marriage. Meanwhile, Mama Jemba wandered the village alone, her once proud posture now hunched with regret. The villagers who had once respected her now turned away when she passed. They whispered about her downfall, how she had looked down on her own daughter, only to end up with nothing. She had spent her whole life teaching Amani that money was the key to happiness, that love was for fools. But now, one daughter was a queen, loved by all, while the other was a prisoner of her own greed. And she was neither feared nor respected anymore. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, she stood outside Zahra's old hut, staring at the empty doorway. She had once laughed at her daughter for living there, but now she wished she could turn back time. She wished she had loved Zahra the way she deserved. But it was too late. Zahra had moved forward, and Mama Jemba had been left behind, drowning in the consequences of her own choices. The grand palace gates stood open, their golden embellishments gleaming under the midday sun. Inside, Zahra sat on an ornate throne, dressed in regal silk, her crown resting lightly on her head. Servants moved gracefully around her, attending to her every need. Yet, despite her newfound life of luxury, her heart remained the same: kind, forgiving. When news of Amani's suffering reached her, Zahra did not rejoice. She did not take pleasure in her stepsister's misery, nor did she see it as justice for the years of cruelty she had endured. Instead, she sent a royal messenger with a simple invitation: "Come to the palace, sister. You are welcome here." Amani, shocked and humbled, arrived at the palace days later, her once proud demeanor replaced by quiet hesitation. She stood before Zahra, her eyes downcast, waiting for mockery, for punishment, for anything that would make her feel the weight of what she had done. But Zahra only smiled. "Sister," she said warmly, "you do not have to suffer. Stay here. Find peace." Tears welled in Amani's eyes. She had expected hatred, but instead she was met with love. She fell to her knees, sobbing, "I don't deserve this." Zahra took her hand and lifted her up. "Then be better." But Mama Jemba never came. The invitation had been sent to her as well, yet she refused. Too much pride, too much shame. She could not bear to stand before the daughter she had wronged, to see the kindness in Zahra's eyes that only made her own failures more painful. So she stayed in the village, alone, carrying the weight of her regrets. And Zahra, in the warmth of the palace, lived not with vengeance in her heart, but with the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had won, not through revenge, but through kindness. Zahra sat beside Musa on the grand throne, her hands resting gently in his. The palace was no longer just a place of wealth and power. It was a home filled with love, wisdom, and fairness. Together, they ruled with kindness, ensuring that no woman in the kingdom would ever suffer the way Zahra had. Under their rule, laws were changed. No daughter could be forced into a marriage for wealth. No woman would be seen as lesser just because she was born into hardship. Musa, once a hidden prince, had chosen a queen who understood the struggles of the people, and with Zahra by his side, the kingdom flourished. The village that once mocked her now spoke her name with admiration. Young girls whispered about her story, how she had been treated like a servant, married a poor man, and yet had risen to become their queen. Mothers taught their daughters not to seek riches, but to seek love and kindness, just as Zahra had. Even Mama Jemba's house, which had once been filled with arrogance, became silent. Without her daughters by her side, she lived in regret, hearing the villagers praise Zahra's name while she remained alone. But Zahra held no bitterness. She had won, not by proving her stepmother wrong, but by proving herself right. As the years passed, she and Musa continued to lead with wisdom and justice. Their love remained strong, unshaken by the years, and their people thrived under their care. Zahra had once been a girl with nothing, mocked and cast aside. But now, she was a queen, not just in title, but in heart. And so, she lived, not just happily, but with purpose, ensuring that no woman would ever have to fight the same battles she had. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the village as children gathered around the elders, their wide eyes filled with curiosity. They sat in a circle, listening intently as an old storyteller began the tale that had been passed down for generations, the story of Queen Zahra. "She was once like you," the elder said, his voice warm and steady. "A girl with no riches, no title, and no power. The world saw her as nothing, but her heart was pure, and her love was true. And so, fate rewarded her." The children gasped as they heard how Zahra had chosen Musa, a humble man who had been mocked and looked down upon. They laughed at the foolishness of those who judged him, and they cheered when they learned the truth, that Musa had been a prince all along. "But do you see?" the elder continued, his eyes twinkling. "Zahra did not love him because he was a prince. She loved him when he was nothing, and that is why she became queen." One child, no older than 7, raised a hand. "And what happened to the stepmother?" The elder chuckled. "She lived with her regrets, for she had taught her daughters that wealth mattered more than love. But love, my children, is the greatest treasure of all." The children nodded, their young minds absorbing the lesson. The elder smiled and leaned forward. "Remember this," he whispered. "Never judge a man by his wealth, for even a prince may walk among us in disguise. And never let gold blind you to the value of a kind heart." As the fire crackled and the stars twinkled above, the children carried the story of Zahra in their hearts, a tale of love, patience and destiny, one that would never be forgotten.